On behalf of the Louisiana Center for the Book in the State Library of Louisiana, thank you for joining us for this virtual 2021 Louisiana Book Festival presentation. This program is Celebrating with St. Joseph Altars, the history, recipes, and symbols of a New Orleans tradition by Sandra Scalise Juneau. A native New Orleanian of Sicilian heritage, Sandra Scalise Juneau has created cultural exhibits for public display at Hallmark Card Company in New York and the 1984 Louisiana World's Fair. Renowned for her artistry of Sicilian pastry designs, her works remain on permanent exhibit at the Southern Food and Beverage Museum in New Orleans and the Italian-American Museum of Los Angeles. Her book, Celebrating with St. Joseph Altars, was published in 2021 by LSU Press. Ladies and gentlemen, Sandra Scalise Juneau.
This book, Celebrating with St. Joseph Altars, the history, recipes, and symbols of a New Orleans tradition, is a work that probably I have been writing most of my life, but it came to fruition 2 years ago through LSU Press and with the help of my editor, Cynthia Lejeune Nobles, who was fabulous to work with. What's exciting about this book is the way it's been received. It has just been astounding to receive feedback from many generations, people I've known all of my life, new strangers. The thing about St. Joseph Altars is that there is a connection. St. Joseph Altars connect people in such a special way. And this book has connected me to so many people across the United States and in celebration of this amazing tradition. So what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit today about this book. We settled on the title of Celebrating. For me, that's a proactive word. And the St. Joseph Altar tradition is a celebration. It's a celebration of families, of generations, of history, of tradition, of religious sacredness. So in talking about the St. Joseph Altar, I really did a lot of research. I've written about this many times. I've been a food writer since the early 60s for various publications. But writing about St. Joseph Altars is so near and dear to my heart because I grew up in this tradition with two Sicilian grandmothers who taught me about food as love and art. So there was that lagniappe in New Orleans of having two Sicilian grandmothers. Quite amazing. New Orleans is so filled with many traditions, and the Sicilian New Orleans traditions are deeply rooted, and this particular tradition goes back to the Middle Ages in Sicily. There was a time in Sicily, and we don't have an exact date, but this oral history has been handed down from generation to generation. Nothing was written about St. Joseph's Altars maybe until the early 20th century. But the story is that at a time around the 12th century, there was a famine in Sicily and the people were starving. There was no food. The cattle was dying, the crops were failing, and the people were starving. So they prayed to St. Joseph, the protector of the family, the patron of Sicily, for relief from the famine. And relief came in the form of a simple little crop, the fava bean crop. In New Orleans, we call these lucky beans. Everyone probably has one that I know has one in their pocket, a purse, or the back of the drawer. It's a symbol of abundanza, abundance, the St. Joseph Altar tradition. This little lucky bean is the symbol of that tradition. So it was the fava bean crop that was able to sustain the people. This was a crop that they didn't even eat normally. They would use it as fodder for cattle. But it was hardy, it grew in the parched earth, and it became their sustaining crop. So the promise was, when the crops return, we will have a feast in your honor, St. Joseph. On the feast day of St. Joseph, which is always celebrated on March 19th, we will prepare a feast and invite all of the families and all of the community to share in this feast. So that tradition began. As the crops came back, the feast grew in abundance, abundanza, which means abundance, and it's celebrated still today. And it's just incredible to see how this tradition has morphed through the years into many, many, many cultures. So the thing about St. Joseph's altars, it's the coming together of people in the most loving way in honor of St. Joseph to prepare special foods. Over the years, many special foods have been associated with the St. Joseph altar tradition. Because St. Joseph's feast day arrives in mid-Lent, mid-Carême, there is never any meat on a St. Joseph altar, but certainly that's no sacrifice in Louisiana, and definitely not a sacrifice to Sicily. So the meatless meal, the savory dishes, there's always a red fish, many, many types of vegetables, whatever is the springtime vegetables. Artichokes always on the altar. There's an interesting vegetable called carduni, which I grew up with, that's always on the St. Joseph altar. And what I was able to do is take those recipes that I learned firsthand from my Sicilian grandmothers and put them into this book. The recipes for many families were lost after Katrina. So I was able to replicate those recipes, take what may have been handed down orally, put it down on paper, test the recipes. Sometimes they went in huge proportions for St. Joseph altar production. We broke them down into usable portions for a home kitchen, and those are the recipes that were in the book. Those recipes have stood the taste of time. So there are only 60 recipes in the book, but they're carefully selected. There are the savory dishes, and there are the cookies, the sweets. I think you'll find many of the favorites that you may have seen on St. Joseph's altars included in this book, with intricate details on how to produce them. But the other part about the St. Joseph altar book is that I wanted to focus on what does it all mean? What is this tradition about? So I did a lot of research. I asked a lot of questions. I actually went back to Sicily, to the home of my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, the little town of Kuchigadi, in the province of Trapani in Sicily, and learned firsthand from the ladies there about this tradition and what does it mean. So there's a whole section in the book about symbolism. What do the various items that you see on a St. Joseph's altar mean? Each item on a St. Joseph altar has a religious symbolism. So all of those symbols are documented and in the book. For instance, there's an interesting little item that's often on a St. Joseph altar called a pupo con lova, which literally means puppet with eggs. The story about that is that there was a time in the Middle Ages when the eating of eggs during Lent was forbidden. So what did these creative Sicilians decide to do with all the eggs that the chickens kept laying for them? They made toys for the children that were not meant to be eaten, but they were always in the Easter baskets. And in fact, growing up in my Sicilian family, I always had these little figures in my Easter basket. So these pupo con lova, very intricately designed pieces of pastry over a dyed egg, will be on a St. Joseph altar. And many people say, well, what does it mean? Why is it there? Well, it's a symbol of hope and rebirth of springtime. So that's always on a St. Joseph altar. Maybe not so much today, but always in the past. Another amazing feature about St. Joseph altars are the large decorative cakes called Kuchigadi, which are fig-filled pastries that are carved in an intricate design. Each one has a religious symbolism. There is usually the cross, which symbolizes Christ, the staff, which symbolizes St. Joseph, and the heart, which symbolizes Mary. There are also many other pieces of fish, which is a symbol of early Christians, baskets, the symbol of abundanza, and many, many other shapes. This is an artistry that is waning a bit. I've tried to teach as many people as possible about this artistry, as I learned it from my grandmother. And so each person, each artist puts their own individual spin on whatever they design. The thing about St. Joseph altars is that no two will ever be alike. They are a manifestation of the hands that prepared them. And there are many, many hands who prepare a St. Joseph altar. Usually a St. Joseph altar is prepared in 3 steps. The 3, it's like a flat altar tabletop with 2 or possibly 3 additional toppings, steps, covered in beautiful lace linens. And the 3 steps symbolize the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, or in my grandmother's Sicilian dialect, Gesù, Maria, Giuseppe. So everything about the St. Joseph altar is done in 3s. You will often find lemons on a St. Joseph altar in groups of 3s. Many, many things in groups of 3s to symbolize the Holy Family. There are so many, the cooked foods on the St. Joseph altar are phenomenal. There's something called a Froshia, which is a Sicilian omelet, usually made with fresh vegetables. Could be green beans or broccoli or artichokes. And it's similar to a frittata, if you're familiar with that. It's a vegetable omelet that's done in layers of breadcrumbs, cheese, vegetables, eggs, breadcrumbs, and cheese. And it's just a delicious specialty, just delicious. The main dish that is served on a St. Joseph altar is a pasta dish called pasta con le sarde, pasta with sardines. As a child growing up, I loved everything about a St. Joseph altar, and I was asked to portray the Blessed Mother for my grandmother's St. Joseph altar. My younger cousin, who portrayed St. Joseph, wasn't too fond of the pasta con la sarde. So the tradition is the 3 children who represent the saints are seated at a special table and given a little taste of everything on the altar after the altar has been blessed. Well, my cousin wasn't going to taste that pasta with sardines, but I said, I'll take his portion. And I ate his portion and mine. And I still love that dish. The pasta con la sarde is always topped with a breadcrumb topping, which is called moudica, which is in Sicily, there is no waste of any food. And bread is so prevalent in Sicily. The breadcrumbs, the stale bread is always toasted and made into crumbs. And those crumbs are repurposed in so many different ways. But the moudica is very, very special. And it's always the topping on the pasta con la sarde. The sweets for St. Joseph altar are endless. They're amazing. Cannoli is one of the favorites. Spingia di San Giuseppe. I was able to get the recipe for that specialty from the Mercato family, which they make only at St. Joseph's Town. A spingia is like a cream puff with a ricotta filling, which is absolutely heavenly. So that recipe is in there. The cannoli are the way I make them at home, and everyone loves the cannoli. Golly, there are so many more. The Pina Latta, that's an interesting one. Pina Latta means pine cone, and it's little bits of pasta dough, egg and flour pasta dough, that's been rolled and cut and deep fried. And then it's dipped in caramelized sugar. So there's only 3 ingredients to this recipe, just egg, flour, and sugar. But oh my goodness, they're so delicious. These little pieces of caramelized dough are mounded into pyramid shapes to represent pine cones, and they symbolize the toys of the child Jesus, the pignolati, the pine cones. So there are many, many, many special items that are included with their description. What do they mean? Where do they come from? How do you use them? How do you repair them? And I think you'll find that interesting. Also, what I included in the book, and this is a really important element for me, if you talk to anyone who's ever hosted a St. Joseph altar, there are always little miracles. miracles. St. Joseph has a way of making little miracles, not big miracles, but little miracles, and everybody has a story to tell. So I gathered just a few of those little miracle stories, and I included one section of the book about those little miracles, true stories that I hope you will find inspiring. The other section of the book that I'm very proud of are the prayers. As I was growing up, I recall my grandmother and my great-grandmother, the 9 days before St. Joseph's altar, before March 19th, would say the Novena of St. Joseph. It's a sacred prayer. It was done in a chanting. I have included those prayers in the Sicilian dialect with English translations. These are very rare. It was hard to find this. I was fortunate to be given this prayer, and to include it in the book to me is very sacred. Also, there are blessings of St. Joseph altar. The whole St. Joseph altar tradition is sacred. The sacredness of people preparing the food, of people coming together to celebrate and enjoy the food, to invite people in the community to share in the food. That's all sacred, and the food is all blessed. So none of this blessed food could ever be thrown away. It's always given in the community. There are so many other elements, but one of the other elements that I find really interesting is the tupa tupa. The word tupa means to knock, knock, knock. And the tradition is that 3 children represent the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Usually they're the grandchildren of the hosting family of the St. Joseph altar. And as I said, I was fortunate to represent Blessed Virgin when I was 5 years old. So these 3 children are given a little pageant to prepare. Sometimes they're dressed in pageant clothes to represent those figures, and sometimes they're just in Sunday dress. But the tradition is, if it's outdoors, it's on 3 separate doors, or if it's within a house, it could be 3 doors within a house. But you go to the first door and you knock, tupa tupa, knock knock. And at the first door, someone has pre-rehearsed to say, "There's no room for you here." This is a replication of the Bethlehem story. Then they go to the second door, knock knock. And the person pre-rehearsed said, "There's no room for you here." They go to the third door and they knock, knock, and the doors open and the person says, "Welcome, come in. The feast has been prepared for you." And behold, there is the St. Joseph altar. I can tell you, as a 5-year-old, I was so familiar with my grandmother's dining room. However, when I walked into that St. Joseph altar on that day, it was an experience I can't even begin to describe to you. There is an aroma to a St. Joseph altar that can only be described as ambrosial. All of the elements, the candles, the flowers, the fruit, the food, all together, there is this aroma that every time I walk into a St. Joseph's altar, I get that same feeling that I had at 5 years old walking into my grandmother's St. Joseph altar. So I hope you will enjoy this book. I hope you will treasure the history, the symbolism, the stories. And I hope when you make these recipes that you will have friends join in with you, because it is truly a labor of love, but it's always much more fun when you have a group working together in honor of St. Joseph. Thank you. Okay, so what we're preparing today is one of the cuccidati that are always displayed on a St. Joseph altar. And as I mentioned earlier, each shape has a religious symbolism, and there are many, many different shapes. I think today the shape I'm going to make is the shape of the fish, which is one of the earliest Christian symbols. It was the passcode into the catacombs that the Christians used, the shape of the fish. Okay, so what we have prepared is a simple dough, and that recipe is in the book, and it's just flour mixed with Crisco and sugar mixed with water to dissolve the sugar, not boiled. You don't want the water boiling, you just want it tepid, because if the water is too hot, it will destroy the gluten in the flour. So you don't want it to be too hot, you just want it tepid water. So we're just gonna roll out this dough. To give us a basic shape of a fish. This requires imagination. There's no mold. However, if you're comfortable, you can draw a picture of what you're going to be working on and work from that. But as I learned from my grandmother, it was just all eye and hand. Are you starting to see a fish? The thing about these cuchigadi is that they are meant to be eaten. It's part of the St. Joseph altar tradition to prepare for the St. Joseph feast the best of what you as an artist, as a cook, can prepare in honor of St. Joseph. So in many cases, because these are so rare, some of the kuchigadi that I've made have been sprayed with acrylics, frozen, not eaten. And that makes me really upset, because that is the antithesis of what this tradition is. The tradition is all about sharing, preparing the best, and sharing it in a meal. Okay. So what we're going to do is take this shape and put it on paper. So in order to move the piece, it helps to just use your rolling pin. The dough has to be the right texture. If it's too dry, it will crack and break. So you want it moist enough that it will not crack and break as you move it. I'm gonna add a little more flour to it to smooth it out. Now, I'm gonna put this over here. So the next step is to put in the fig filling. And this is the fig, these are the figs that have been prepared. They are ground in a food grinder with honey, cinnamon, orange zest, and a little bit of black pepper. That little bit of black pepper gives it a little back bite that's just the right touch. These are the figs that you would use. Don't think you can go pick figs out of your backyard, because though we have delicious Louisiana figs, they are not the right texture for this product. So this is an imported dried fig. What happens is when you take them out of the packet, there are stems. You need to cut those little stems off. I like to run them in a colander under warm water, which kind of softens them, before I mix them with the seasonings and then run them through the grinder. So this is the final product. Now, if you were making the small fig cookies, which are also called kuchigadi, this is what they would look like. They're in a leaf design, which is the way my grandmother taught me how to make them. Everybody makes them differently, but this was the way I was taught. And her tradition about the leaf is that we are all part of the same tree. The branches connect us, which represents unity in Christ, and these are the leaves on the tree. So everything has a religious symbolism. So we're going to put these over here. As I said, there are many different shapes on a St. Joseph altar. Sometimes you will see shapes like this in the circle. This is in honor of Santa Lucia. The little words are spelled out in dough. Santa Lucia is very important to Sicilian culture, because she was a young woman who grew up in Sicily in the town of Syracuse. one of the earliest Christian saints from the 3rd century. So Santa Lucia will always be honored on a St. Joseph altar. Now, the next step we're going to do is to put the fig filling in. I have warm water here to moisten my hands just to spread this out. So this is like pie making. You have a layer of dough, a layer of filling, the fig filling in this case, and you're going to top it with another layer of dough. But the next step after that will be to carve that top layer of dough into an intricate design. And as I said, these ingredients are delicious. It would be sinful not to eat this wonderful food. So this big piece that's prepared, displayed on a St. Joseph altar, I like to keep them in shrink wrap so that they are perfectly clean before they're consumed. And then they should be broken. You don't cut bread, you break bread. So you don't cut these, you break them. All right, so we're going to cover this with plastic wrap. To even it out, I'm going to roll over it with the rolling pin together. Because when you bake it, you want it to be even, not lumpy. So the piece that's going to go on top has to be a little bit bigger than this piece because you want to allow at least 1 inch edging all the way around so you can do your edging design. And I'll explain how that's done in just a minute. I hope it's starting to take on the characteristic of a fish. Okay, we're going to stitch this aside and then roll it this top piece. So this is one of those forms of artistry that takes patience. There's no rush on this. There's no mold. It's however the spirit moves you. And what's interesting in working with dough over the years, I have found that sometimes the dough will tell you what it wants to be. The dough will just give you the shape it wants to be. It's almost like Michelangelo said, it's already in the marble. I just cut away what isn't needed. I'm just measuring. And again, no two will ever be alike and they're not meant to be perfect either, because this is folk art, and folk art is not meant to be perfection. So it might be a little off-centered. The dough has to be the right texture so it can stretch. Okay. Now we're going to take this piece out and we're going to put it on top of that other piece. We're going to allow about 1 inch all around and a little more because we're going to do some of the fins. So you press with your fingers the outline of where your figs are, so you get an idea of what you're working with here. And then you smooth it out. There was an expression that my grandmother said, I need to find out in Sicilian the words. But she wanted the dough as smooth as a baby's bottom. Yeah, I need to find out. Unfortunately, I don't speak the language, but I did learn to cook it. Okay. Now, I'm working with tools that have been in my family for generations. This was a tool my grandmother brought with her from Sicily when she came to New Orleans as a girl around 1902. She was 16 years old. She arrived with her father. She was the oldest of 5 daughters. They came first, my grandmother and her father, my great-grandfather. He established an oyster bar business in New Orleans on St. Philip Street. And after 2 years, he sent for my grandmother and my grandmother's 4 younger sisters. But this was the tool she always used. And so this is the tool that I'm very privileged to use. So as she was cutting, each design is in 3 in symbol of the Holy Family. So as she was cutting, she was saying the prayer, Jesus, Maria, Giuseppe, Jesus, Maria, Giuseppe. And it was an unconscious thing, wasn't anything special that she was doing. It was just her way of saying her little prayer. Here's that knife. Jesus, Maria, Giuseppe. It was so extraordinary to watch and to learn this procedure from my grandmother. I just feel very privileged to continue this and feel there's this absolute connection every time I continue this. And again, this is a matter of practice. It takes time and patience and practice. But it's one of those things that's described as a labor of love. And once you get into it, it's therapy for me. These cakes that I've made have been several times. I've made them from museums in other materials other than edible dough. There's an Italian American museum in Los Angeles, and I did some Kuchigadi designs for them in salt dough, which is murder on the hands. It's so hard to work with. It's not as forgiving as working with real dough, but they serve the purpose because they're on permanent display. Also at the Southern Food and Beverage Museum in New Orleans, there are Kuchigadi made in salt dough that I have made. At the Italian American Museum in New Orleans, for years, there was a display that was replicated in plastic by a Japanese food art company in Los Angeles that made sushi replicas. This was a project that was funded by the National Park Service. It was rather an expensive project. Each one of this was over 20 years ago, each one of the Kuchigadi, and there were, I think, 6, there was a cost of about $1,500 to each piece. We even replicated breads and cannoli, and on the breads, we were knocking off the sesame seeds because they were charging for each sesame seed. Um, Now this will not be wasted. This will be reused, re-rolled. There's no waste in a Sicilian kitchen. This will be repurposed for maybe smaller cuccidadis or maybe another shape. And this dough actually can be refrigerated overnight. I wouldn't keep it more than a day. But if you refrigerate it overnight, this is something I'm sure my grandmother never did, but you can warm it in the microwave 30 seconds to get it back to a pliable texture. You wouldn't want to do it too many times, but it does. I've done that in the past. Normally, I would work with a big sheet of parchment paper, but I don't happen to have any today. So we're working with my paper, which are we starting to see a fish? This is a technique called quilling, where you cut and you curl. Back in the Middle Ages, the cloistered nuns did paper art in quilling, and they would sell their products as fundraisers for the convents. I was taught by a Benedictine nun, Sister Jerome Polo, this artistry of quilling the dough. I've learned a lot of different techniques from different people and put them all together. Most of what I learned was from my maternal grandmother, Angelina Corona Accardo, but I've picked up other little techniques here and there. And this, of course, represents the fins on our fish. This is described in the book, this process, as well as the whole process of making the cuccidata and the recipes. And again, these recipes have been handed down from generation to generation. Nothing was really written about a St. Joseph's altar until maybe the early 20th century. So I really treasure these recipes that have been part of my legacy, my heritage, my grandmother's legacy, actually. So it's the third one that you twist, squeeze and twist, and make the little curl. Just a little bit of fanciness. In Sicily, this art of making cuchigadi is called squartucciati, which means lace making. And the procedure that I witnessed in the town of my grandmother, Kuchigadi, truly is like lace making. The ladies in the town who continue this tradition are part of an organization called L'Association per Loco, which means local association. And it's an organization of artisans throughout Italy who've been recognized for a particular type of folk art. In the town of Kuchigadi, where my grandmother was from, in the province of Trapani, I spent a day in the home of the Salvaggio sisters, who I'm sure have New Orleans connections, so many of us do, learning their method, which I could never replicate because they are true artisans. But, you know, each artist has their own particular style. There's no right or wrong way. And again, it's folk art, so it's not meant to be perfect. This tradition in Sicily actually only exists in several towns now. Not every town in Sicily celebrates the St. Joseph's Day with a St. Joseph altar. certainly they all celebrate the Feast of St. Joseph. And even on the mainland in Italy, the St. Joseph altar tradition is almost unknown. It's really unique to Sicily. The town of Portoriale continues this tradition. The town of Salemi, which is not far away, continues the tradition. But not every town in Sicily continues the tradition. It's very unique to certain areas. Okay, our fish is starting to take shape. That's his eye. Yeah. This is where the carving is going to begin. Now, according to tradition, all of the flowers that are in a cuccidata are connected to a singular stem, and that symbolizes unity in Christ. Not everyone knows that. That's something I learned from one of my great aunts. But that's the way I was taught, and that's what I continue. The flowers also have a religious symbolism. The flowers in 3 symbolize the Holy Family. The flowers in 5 symbolize the 5 wounds of Christ from the cross. The dough has to be exactly the right texture to be able to do this carving. If it's not, it's just not going to work. And the figs have to be the right texture. I have gone to help at St. Joseph Altars, and I've told the groups in advance how the figs should be prepared, and sometimes they don't listen and they just prepare them a different way. And if the figs are too soft, then they will bleed through. When you're preparing this, you want the dough to be immaculately clean. If the figs bleed through, then when you bake this, your dough will be dark and it won't be pretty. You want the immaculate white contrasted against the dark figs. And when you bake them at a very low temperature for about an hour, about 250, no more than 300 for at least an hour, so that you're basically drying it out. And what you want is a bone white top contrasted against the dark glistening figs. So we're connecting our flowers to a singular stem. And if you notice, I didn't cut through here because that's where we're going to do the final connection, which symbolizes our unity in Christ. Now, the next step is to lift. And again, the dough has to be just right. The figs have to be just right in order for this to work. So basically, you're revealing the interior. Now, the next step is to create a scallop. Again, this is like lace making, so you want to create that little scallop. So this particular knife is a replication of my grandmother's knife that I lost when I was giving a demo on making these kuchigadi. Don't know where it went, probably went into the garbage. We checked the garbage and it wasn't there. Anyway. But a friend of mine, a knife maker, who makes magnificent custom design knives, said, send me the dimensions. He lives in Florida. And I said, don't make the knife until you tell me how much it's going to be. And he said, send me the dimensions. So he sent me the knife, no charge. And he gets big dollars for his custom design knives. So this I treasure. Now, with that done, we're going to hook these, what my grandmother used to say, bringing the flowers to life. They kind of pop up. And then you're going to come back and give them a little character. As I was in Italy, looking at Etruscan grave sites, I was looking and saying, oh my God, those are my Kuchigadi flowers. I mean, I saw Kuchigadi flowers in the cathedrals, in Etruscan ruins. Oh my God, they were there. These designs are not so unique after all. Now we're going to come back and we're going to put some more character in here. And these will represent the 5 wounds of Christ. Head, hands, feet. Side. Neck. Now, this is another procedure. We're giving our fish scales. Simple little tools. My grandmother always had her scissors, all her tools that she used just for this purpose, not for any other purpose. But we're giving our fish scales. So amazing to me that this artistry is just simple, nothing complicated. And now the last step, these are pecan pickers. You can use so many different tools, is to finish. If you were making a pie, you would go around with a fork and seal the edges. So this would basically sealing the edges with this. So there's a lot in the symbolism, the etching design done in 3s, the interior design that has symbols of Christ. So when you look at a St. Joseph altar and you see all those various designs, look closely and see if you can figure out what the design means. And like any form of art, the eye is in the beholder. So however it speaks to you, that's what it is. Well, this guy is ready to be baked. It'll bake at 250 for at least an hour. And you'll know it's done when you can touch it and it doesn't bounce back and it remains bone white. You don't want it to brown. You want that contrast of the bone white dough against the dark figs. And there he is. My hope for you is that when you visit a St. Joseph altar and you look at all the various elements that are displayed there, that you'll have a greater appreciation for the symbolism, the history, the artistry, the sacredness, the love, the labor of love that a St. Joseph altar represents. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this presentation of the virtual 2021 Louisiana Book Festival. Please visit our official bookseller, Cavalier House Books, and receive 20% off all featured festival titles through the end of the year. A special thank you to our festival sponsors. The Louisiana Book Festival will return on October 29th, 2022.